Well, hello, everybody. I had a chance a little while ago to speak with Daron Babcock. Daron has a fascinating personal story and is in the middle of some incredible work in a part of town near Texas called Bonton, and he started a farm. Bonton was a food desert, and so he started a farm, but it was a desert for so many other aspects too. The poverty there, the history of that neighborhood is really tough, and Daron made a personal decision to do something different and engage and walk with the people there, build a relationship there, and really understand what resources are needed so that people from all backgrounds can thrive, and is building a model there that we can learn from and apply to Grand Rapids or the 825 cities that he talks about across the country that are somewhat similar to Bonton. Nothing is exactly the same, but there's these principles that he's living and learning that we can use in other places to really express our belief in people and to create an environment where there are resources and there are tools in place for people to thrive because of his belief in people and his belief in serving. Fascinating friend, wonderful person, and a great story. I think you're going to really, really enjoy it.
We believe and have always believed in this country that man was created in the image of God, that he was given talents and responsibilities and was instructed to use them to make this world a better place in which to live. And you see, this is the really great thing of America.
It's time to discover what binds us together, and finding it has the power to transform our world. That's what I believe. How about you? Daron, thanks for first of all, just thanks for being here and having the opportunity to connect. I know it gave you a chance to get away from the heat in Texas.
This is the best present you could have given me. Western Michigan weather.
Yeah, that's great. Well, usually we don't say that to our friends who
in the
visit
summer,
us.
right?
In the summer, it's all good. But Daron, you've got an incredible story on a lot of dimensions, and I want to start with Bonton Farms and just kind of talk about what it is. But then we'll spend some time and go back and to go who you are and why you're doing this work. So maybe just to kind of to ground us all here, talk about this effort that you have in South Dallas in a tough neighborhood called Bonton Farms.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Well, Bonton, first of all, is not unlike inner city communities that you'd find in any city across the country, right? So just for context for people that may be listening that don't understand, you know what Bonton is. It's the neighborhood on the other side of the tracks, right? That's what we refer to, and it's a troubled place.
Literally on the other side of the railroad tracks.
Yeah,
which becomes a dividing line in many respects.
Our history is a troubled history. Yeah. We have this amazing start to the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It says we hold these truths to be self-evident that we're all created equal, and then we did that coinciding with slavery. Right. And so while we have these principles that we espouse to, we've yet to get in full stride and live up to them. And so we have places that were systematically designed to separate people, and in that separation, there's barriers that exist that suffocate human flourishing, that suffocate the potential that God created in each one of us. Right. And so Bonton Farms is simply this innovative entrepreneurial experiment to see what if, instead of treating people as if they're the problem, and therefore creating social programs that care for them in a variety of ways, what if we bet on them?
Right.
What if we really believed in people?
Invested
in them in a way that we said, let's understand you. What barriers do you face that I might not understand because I don't have your lived experience? Right. And then what tools and resources do you need that you can use to build your own life? Not that we build it for you, but you empower you to build your own life. And if we did that, would people do it? Yeah. And I think, in Bonton, we've gone from the first day I went to Bonton, the friend that invited me was involved in prison ministry, and a guy that he met with inside a prison happened to be from Bonton. And when he got paroled, he promised him he'd carry that relationship forward. Right. And so he went to Bonton to meet him. He's like, you can't just drive here. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, you got to let me know ahead of time, and I'll meet you at the floodgates. Like,
Well, that's interesting.
What floodgates? Like, what is it? And he's like, well, we were built. This is an old freedmen's community. It's a community that was established by freed slaves during emancipation, and we couldn't move where other people lived, where there was running water and electricity and streets. We had to move where nobody else would live, and so we built this community on the banks of the river. And the Trinity River runs south. Nobody else would build there because it's a floodplain.
Right.
And when they put a highway in, which is another part of the systemic thing, highways and railroads that further segregated and separated, when they put the highway in, they put floodgates where you have to go under the 2 ways in and 2 ways out of our community. You go under the railroad track or under the highway to get in. Well, they installed floodgates so that when the rains would come, they would close those gates to keep the water in our neighborhood. And so Bonton was a place that, because of it, was so isolated, the neighborhood wouldn't let foreigners, people that weren't from there, come in unless you had business there. You literally had to have people meet you at the floodgates and escort you in, or you'd be what they call hood evicted. You would be ejected from the neighborhood one way or another, whether you liked it or not.
Wow.
So we had to meet at the floodgates, and that was how I got introduced to the neighborhood.
Right. But so okay, so here's the neighborhood.
It was a rough
you
place.
started a farm. You noticed a lot of things going on there. This urban farming endeavor, this entrepreneurial endeavor that you have impacted a lot of aspects of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go back, and we'll get to that, and we'll talk about what's going on and how that worked. But let's go back and talk a little bit about you and why you had a friend who introduced you to this area, who brought you to the floodgates and said, hey, I got to walk you around. How'd you get there? How does Daron Babcock find his way to Bonton?
I think all the pieces of the puzzle belong. I'm 58 years old now, so I have some lived experience,
very young.
Right? And I think one of the things I've learned is that everything belongs. All of our experiences are leading us somewhere, especially if you're a person of faith, right? That nothing we go through is wasted. It all is part of building up to something. And so for me, I grew up in the panhandle of Texas, to a very traditional family. Strong family values, strong faith component, which I didn't understand or subscribe to, and old school traditional values where boys were raised to be men and your value was predicated on your character and work ethic. And I was just taught over and over and over that if you want something, then work hard for it,
right.
And don't complain if you don't get it, because if you don't get it, it meant you didn't work hard enough for it. And that worked. That worked for me.
Right.
And the more you apply those principles and it works, the more confidence you gain, the more you keep repeating it over and over, and you continue to build a life that way. I went to school on a wrestling scholarship at the University of Oklahoma in 1984. I thought I was really special, and I got there, and they had 3 guys that just came back from the Olympics. 2 of them won the gold medal, and I'm like, I don't belong here. And they give us this speech and talk about how we had 41 kids in our recruiting class. We were the #1 ranked team in the country. And they go around, and there's these pictures of Olympians and national champions and Big 8 champions, which speaks to my age. And then they said, look, there's out of this entire class, there's going to be 3 of you that wind up getting your pictures on the wall. And here's what's going to happen. Some of you are going to get and feel like the college experience is more valuable than your scholarship in your wrestling career, and you're going to integrate into that, and that's fine. Some of you aren't going to go to school and keep your grades up. Some of you have already achieved the best. You've already reached your pinnacle. But you are provided the opportunity and the tools to become a champion if you want to be, and the rest is up to you. And they handed out these shirts that said Oklahoma Wrestling on the front, and on the back it said, if it is to be, it's up to me.
Right.
Which is what I've been told my whole life.
A normal phrase in an athletic situation, in a lot of situations, sure.
So I continued to build a life around that until in 1988, my wife was diagnosed with cancer.
So were you married you got married after that time at OU?
We met my wife and I, first wife and I met in college, and fell in love and got married as soon as we graduated. Okay. Started a family, started a business. moved to the Pacific Northwest because that's where we wanted to live. Everything we wanted, we thought and believed
Worked
that if
for
we
it.
worked for it, we could get it. So
Right,
that's what we were building.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, tragedy hit.
Shit.
And everything I'd built my life on was a lie. The one thing,
Talk about that.
well, the one thing I would have done, I would have outworked anything for, was to protect her from that experience.
Cancer. Yeah,
I mean,
cancer.
it's especially at that young age, our kids were 3 and 5 years old, and to suffer in that way, when you see somebody you love suffer, you had have done anything.
I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry for that. As you come to know your story, there's just an unbelievable pain
Yeah.
that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It just doesn't go away.
No.
And those things are, they're real.
Yeah.
And they're the most important things, but you can't, in so many ways, you can't influence it.
No. I mean, you
try
learn
to
and
work hard,
overcome
you
and
do
grow.
what you can, but you can't do it. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So I think the thing about that's so important is that it forced a reframing of my worldview, where everything I built my life on was good and true to a degree. But in large part, when you think that you have all that power, you become your own God in some way. And what I don't think we do as human beings is make very good gods.
Right.
I think we have limits to things and boundaries to things that, when healthy, serve us well.
Right.
But certainly, like anything, if it goes beyond that boundary, the healthy thing can become toxic.
Yeah.
And for me, I had this illusion that I was more powerful than I was, which means that I also built my life not only in what I could accomplish, but what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I think lives are best lived when you serve others.
Right.
And so that's something you learn and grow through too. So life becomes immensely more meaningful and purpose-filled when you live it for the benefit of a greater thing than just yourself.
Yeah. Well,
And so all that all got exposed at that time.
Yeah. So you're at this point. You lose your wife.
Yeah.
You've gone through, and she's gone through a horrible experience, and you have 2 young children.
Yeah.
And all these things in your life are now that you thought were 100% true, still have some validity, but don't quite answer the questions that you have. So
Incomplete.
Take us from there. Now you're with 2 young sons, and how do you take those next steps forward?
So, I fortunately, one of the really important parts of that story is that I wouldn't be alive here. I was in such bad shape after that I would have died. I was on the precipice of it, and I was living so recklessly that while I wouldn't have taken my own life, I certainly would appreciate it if I could have put myself in a position where somebody else would. And we were in Oregon, 2,500 miles away from my family and her family, so nobody knew how bad it was until they did. And when they did, the amazing thing is that while I had given up, they didn't. People cared enough about me to fight in my behalf when I couldn't fight for myself.
Yeah.
And I'm here today because of that.
When you were hurting, you were doing things that were not healthy for you and for others. You were in a tough spot.
I was in a very self-destructive way where I didn't have the social or emotional tools to navigate through that time. So I used things that were visible. I mean, my first thing was I was angry, so I hurt other people. It made me feel good to hurt other people.
Get into a fight.
Anything, yeah. And then one night in a bar fight, jumped in a car with some people I didn't know to get away, and they took me back to their apartment, and there was cocaine all on the table. It's the first night I ever did that. And I had the same relief from my emotional torment from doing drugs that I did from hurting other people, but now I don't have to hurt other people. So that's better. I mean, it's a sick way to think about it, but people that are in that place like I was don't think clearly. And so I was so desperate to have some relief from that I started using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. And then that's where, before long, you're not using them, they're using you.
Right.
And they'll lead you to either prison or death.
Right.
There's 2 destinations.
And you had family that believed in you more, as you
Family
said
and
earlier.
some of my former teammates that showed up and wouldn't let go of me.
Right.
I didn't want them, I wanted to just be left to my own devices. I just wanted to finish that journey, and they wouldn't let me.
So they intervened, you intervened, you made a decision. How did you talk about getting on that right track for yourself? And, and how, so you still have two boys, you're trying to find your way forward. How do you find that transition out? A lot of hard work.
Yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but I think that's why it's so important that we serve each other, because I couldn't have done it alone.
Right.
I wouldn't have made it.
You couldn't work yourself out.
I didn't have the tools. I couldn't have done it alone. I needed people to show me the way, and I need people to walk along that journey with me. And I think there's some really valuable stuff in the work we aspire to do that those lessons would apply to.
Yeah. But you still had to do something.
Oh yeah.
But you couldn't do it by yourself.
I couldn't do it alone.
Yeah.
And I when I got into rehab the third time, the first two times I jumped out the window and ran away, and they wouldn't quit on me.
Wow.
So I think that's an important part for us to understand too, is this journey of life isn't a perfect line.
Right.
As much as we would like for it to be, it's just not. But one thing I've learned is it's worth persevering through those ups and downs, because people do often come out the other side when we persevere, where there's almost no chance if we don't.
Right.
And so I love to share that, because I think we get frustrated and quit too early.
Right.
For me, when I went to that third rehab, I was so distraught that they had me on suicide watch just because I wouldn't participate and I wouldn't eat. And so they're like, put me on suicide watch. They were concerned about me, so they sent some guys that had been there. They were still in recovery, still in rehab, but they'd been there a while. They were sober. They had some joy in some life in their eyes and some joy in their spirit. And they sent them down to talk to me, and they were professionals. I tell people all the time that getting sober is the easiest part of that. The harder part is the shame you have to endure for what you did when you weren't sober. To me, that was exponentially harder.
Wow.
Because think about it. I just told you how I was raised.
Right.
And then I had betrayed all of that. And the people that had invested in me. You carry a name that you're proud of.
Yeah.
And, to kind of lose that or to tarnish that and to have to deal with that, I think that was exponentially harder than the sober part.
Wow.
But I saw something in those guys that they weren't better yet, but they were better.
Yeah.
And if they could do it, I could do it. And I think that modeling is really important for the work we aspire to as well, is putting people in a place where they see other people prospering because they're doing the hard work on their lives and because they have people walking alongside them, and that's contagious.
Yeah.
And so for me, it became contagious, and I started following those guys and doing the work. And the second day after I said, okay, I'll start participating, they told me I need to go see a spiritual counselor or spiritual advisor.
Okay.
And I was like, that's, I think, a really bad idea. I was angry at a God I didn't believe in, which is kind of funny in hindsight. But I went and spoke with her, and I just remember her saying something that I couldn't get out of my head. And the second night after I met with her, I was back in my room kind of reflecting on the damage I had done, the carnage I had left behind, and that I'm on this journey to try to reclaim it, but can I do it? Is there something to be salvaged? And at that point in time, I was like, I don't think there is. So I don't, even though I'm sober now, and I'm in this place,
you still have this
and I have
past
people
shame,
around
you
me.
have all this stuff behind you, and you think that you've gone too far, maybe, and it
I'd
can't
lost
be
hope.
recovered. Yeah.
I didn't have hope for tomorrow. Tomorrow didn't feel like necessarily I wanted to visit it.
Right.
And that's a scary place to be. So in that time, with the conversation I had with her and this ominous feeling I had of tomorrow not mattering, I just fell to my knees and said, and I get really emotional talking about it, because for me, this is really what changed my life.
Yeah.
Was this I just felt in my knees and said, God, I don't know if you're real or not, but if you are, I quit.
Yeah.
Which is really a faithless prayer.
Yeah.
But in that time, I had this really profound spiritual something that I can't describe that happened to me, that in spite of my circumstances that hadn't changed, I'd screwed up my business. I didn't even recognize this, but I hadn't paid my mortgage in 6 months, and I didn't even know it. It wasn't because I couldn't. I just didn't care. I had either destroyed everything or neglected everything to the point where it was gone or ruined. And yet, in spite of being in that place, I couldn't stop smiling. And I don't know where that came from.
Yeah. Something from the
I don't
inside
know what it means. What does that mean?
Something from the inside out just touched you and grabbed you and gave you hope.
Yeah,
Changed
it
your
was
perspective,
profound.
Gave you hope. Yeah.
It was a profound something that compelled me to try to figure out what just happened.
Yeah.
And something so profound happened, it must be real.
Yeah.
What does it mean to quit to a God you don't know?
Yeah.
What does it mean to surrender? I've never surrendered in my life.
Right.
I was taught not to. It doesn't feel good to quit.
Right.
But sometimes quitting in the right context is the most powerful thing we can do.
Yeah. When you give up, when you surrender, you say, I can't do this alone.
Yeah.
That's all you're really saying is, I can't do this alone.
Yeah.
And I need to walk with somebody. And so thank you for sharing all that. It's deeply emotional.
Yeah, sorry for
personal. No,
for crying
no.
all over you and everybody else. But I just celebrated my 21st year of sobriety, and I get to share this story of testimony, and I willingly go there just because I believe there's a lot of people out there hurting that need to hear somebody that's come through it, and what got them there. Yeah. And for a guy that was raised where it was bad for a man to show emotion and cry, I can't help myself for it. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's real and because it's you.
Yeah.
It's genuine, and those emotions are right there, and you've experienced something that we hope nobody else has to, but we know a lot of people do.
I have to tell you, though, I'm so grateful for it, which is weird to say.
Okay.
But I think that I would have died a really empty, shallow man, chasing my own selfish desires, thinking I was more than I am, living for myself. And this really difficult time in my life rescued me. Wow. I get to live a life now that I hope, when it's all said and done, meant something. Meaning,
purpose. Yeah.
And I think that's we have one chance at this.
Yeah.
It's a gift. And how do we, by the time it's all said and done, learn how to appreciate that gift in a way that we maximize it, and find the true meaning and purpose of life, and not just keep breathing and taking up air and space, living for ourselves.
No, thank you for sharing that. Well, let's keep going a little, and we'll connect these dots. You then dive into your work. You have work. You kind of trade one addiction for another a little bit. You go down this track, and then you kind of have the same sort of sense, like, wait a minute, what am I doing here?
Yeah. Well, I think I longed to find a way to express and to give away what had been given to me. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't there. The opportunity just wasn't presented itself. I'm thankful that, ingrained in who God created me to be and reinforced through my lived experience in my family, that I'm highly competitive to want to accomplish things with my time in my life. But that too can get out of balance. And so I always tend to go overboard with that. And so while my intent was to just go get a job and work and to rebuild my life and to be there for my children, because they'd endured not only the loss of their mother, but then the loss of me as they watched me self-destruct. That's what I wanted to do. But when I apply myself to something, like, I'm all in. And so, I worked for a supply chain company that in 2007 was acquired by the Blackstone Group, and then from 2007 until the time I left for Bonton Farms, ran the supply chain business for their 120 or so portfolio companies and the free market side that we did, which is a big job, and consuming, and was on the road all the time. And that led me up to the point where I had tried certain things within my work environment to live a more purposeful and meaningful life, and it all tended to come up a bit short. And then that one Saturday morning, I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and in the middle of it, he said, "I'm sorry, I got to go to Bonton. We have this," and he told me the story about his involvement in the prison ministry, and that one of his friends had gotten paroled and happened to be from that neighborhood, and that we had to have people meet us at the floodgates. And I was so intrigued by that I joined him that day. And the shortest way to get to the end of that story is sometimes you see things you can't unsee. I met a lot of people in Bonton that were just like me, but they didn't have the people that believed in them to walk alongside them. Yeah. And they didn't have the tools. But they were alive, they were persevering, they had suffered, in many cases been victimized, but they weren't playing the role of the victim. They were just stuck and trying to find a path forward. And those two worlds collided right there.
And that's where your personal story parallels so much. And others who have a similar story of addiction and hardship parallels so much. The people you saw and that you met and that needed hope, and they needed someone to walk with them, and they needed somebody to believe in them and invest in them. And so to a certain extent, as you articulated, all these things in your life prepared you to do what you're doing now.
Yeah.
And so why did you see, or why do you think it was so clear to you when you had that cup of coffee and when you went down there that it said, this is the shift I need to make? Yeah. So talk about that a little bit, and with you, and then we can talk a little bit about the people you met there as well.
Well, I think that, I was reluctant. I think that honestly, and again, I hate to keep harping on my faith, but I can't tell this story apart from it.
That's okay. It's what you believe. That's
but I feel like that there is a living God that has a plan for our lives. And I've experienced that in my life, and that somehow this was part of the plan. I don't understand it. I don't know why me. But I also believe that for most of us, in what I've seen, when you step into that calling or whatever you want to call it, there's a sacrifice. You have to get out of the boat and step on water or walk on water. You have to exhibit some faith for something that's not yet visible or seen or tangible, and you got to trust it. And for me, I struggled with the fact that we were going down on Saturday for 2 hours, having breakfast, serving these men, listening to them, and then going home invigorated, feeling better about ourselves, and then coming back the next week, and those men we said we cared about were still in the same place. Right. And there's this point where if you're honest with yourself, you have to ask yourself the motivation. Why am I spending these 2 hours on every Saturday, driving almost an hour all the way down to this inner city, putting our safety at risk in doing so? It wasn't a safe place to be by any stretch of the imagination. And then what am I getting from it? And the truth of the matter is, I think for me, it made me feel better about who I was and where I was. And yet, I think God had a deeper purpose for me in that, was to truly surrender, step out in faith, and live into something that He prepared for me from the beginning of my first breath on this earth. All of those things that we went through prepared me for that time. And it's just, was I willing to answer the call? Yeah. Because to do that, man, I had to leave everything else behind.
Right.
And my first question is, why me? There's one of my favorite scriptures is when Jesus is talking to Peter, and John's present. And Peter and John had this rivalry. And he's asking Peter, it's the time where he asked Peter, do you love me? 3 times. He says yes, because he's telling him, if you say yes, what he goes on to say is, before long, because you love me, others are going to address you. He's saying you're going to be skinned alive. You're going to be martyred for my sake. Right. And then the first thing Peter's response is, do you remember what his response is? He looks at John and says, "What's it?" He looks at John and says, "What about him?"
So that's right.
And one of my favorite things is, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "What's it to you?"
Yeah.
And so I had that same experience where I was like, why me? Why do I have to give up this world stuff to pursue and be obedient to what you've given me to do? And it's like, this is just what I have for you.
Yeah.
And so I sold my house and left my job, and the rest of the story gets a little shaky, but moved into that neighborhood and just started to learn and to earn trust and to be present. Yeah. And the rest of what Bonton Farms has become is a result of that
move,
surrender, just willingness to be present.
And so there's a huge personal shift, but you are now very aware. You're feeling, absolutely led to be where you are. Now you're starting to observe what's happening in the people's lives around you, the people who are hurting, the people who are stuck, the people who are facing a situation that in many ways parallels what you went through personally. Talk about that community, because what you also said earlier is that there's communities like that all across our country.
It's estimated about 825 of them.
Okay.
45 million Americans that live in places like Bonton.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
it's a pervasive issue.
What did you see? And you talked about opportunities that you have. You talked about systems that are created, and sometimes those systems, it's a question of if you have access to those systems or if you don't. And you talk about, and one of the reasons you started the farm was a food desert. Where there's a desert where normally things would be in communities where the other than those 45 million Americans live, those other things are present. Help us understand that a little bit, what you saw that was present or that wasn't present.
Well, I want to start with the positive.
Okay.
What was present that, to be honest with you, I was surprised about with these amazing people.
There you go.
Gosh. Just some of the richest, strongest, most resilient, loving, trusting. Like, can you imagine that I moved into this neighborhood and I look like everything that has plagued them, and yet they still gradually, over time, with a lot of hard work,
had to build some trust.
But they brought me in and allowed me to be a part of them and trusted me with their stories and their life and their vulnerabilities. And so I was blown away by the people, which makes the contrast of the deficits even more stark. Most of the people I met, not only were these beautiful human beings, but they had also done really bad things. So how do you reconcile the two? And I just tell people all the time, you're not the sum of you're not what you've done. That doesn't define you. It doesn't have to define you.
Right.
But what I saw is this group of men, who's the first group that embraced me, were 6 men of the entire community. There were only 6 that said, we'll defend you, we'll protect you if you choose to do this. And so I started walking with them and learning their story. And the first thing is none of them could get jobs. Right. Which Dallas is a really thriving economy.
Yeah, this is one of the best, biggest,
why
richest
can't you
cities
get a job?
in the world.
You just must not want to work. I see help wanted signs all over the place. But Dallas, like so many of our cities, is a tale of two cities. In Dallas, it's divided geographically by the north and the south. So North Dallas is what you see on TV of our city. South Dallas is more the inner city, the impoverished, people of color, socioeconomic, impoverished conditions. In Dallas, there's a highway that separates the two. I-30 runs east and west, separates the north and the south. North of that line, 55% of our population lives. South of that line, 45%. So it's almost equally distributed. Any guess what percentage of the jobs are north?
80-20.
95. So we have 5% of the almost half the population living where 5% of the jobs are. So what does that matter? Why don't you just drive on the other side of the highway where the jobs are? Poverty impacts mobility. I can't get there. Transportation is expensive. So there's all these barriers that I started to learn through walking alongside these 6 men. I didn't understand any of that. And then, without going in, I'd love to tell you some of those stories. They're really profound, but I know our time is limited. And, one of the things that happened is that I kept getting them job interviews with friends I knew in the business sector, and told them to be honest, and they would all have them in tears on the other side of the desk, hearing their story and what they'd been through and also what they aspired to become. And yet 2 to 3 weeks would go by and they'd call back and say, I'm sorry, we talked to our legal counsel, our HR department, and what they've done is just the liability is too great we have to care for all of our other staff.
For us to invest in them.
Yeah, we just can't do that. And so we got turned down over and over and over again. And so we decided we were going to create our own opportunities. We're going to work together, and we're going to start building resumes by cleaning up our own community. And so we started meeting on my front porch every morning. And in doing so, we said, I'm going to help you build a resume on about 10 to 15 things that take no education or experience to do. And one of them showing up. And showing up on time, right, and being ready to work and work hard through the course of the day, learning how to create value. That's how you get compensated, by value.
That's your
created.
Entrepreneurial spirit.
Sure.
You have this entrepreneurial bent about you, and that's how you do it.
So it was interesting that of the 6 guys that were participating, about half of them weren't consistent in even showing up. And I'm like, that's a problem. So I got on my soapbox and gave them my best lecture about the topic. And they weren't not showing up because they didn't want to be there. They weren't dependable. They weren't showing up because they were chronically ill. I'd never been around sick people like that. I was 47 years old when I moved to Bonton, and I'd never heard of dialysis before. At 47, it's part of our everyday conversation in that neighborhood. Why are so many people so sick? In Bonton, we have more than double the rate of cancer, more than double the rate of stroke, more than double the rate of heart disease, more than double the rate of diabetes, more than double the rate of childhood obesity than the county we're in. Wow. Men in our neighborhood will live 11.7 years less than the average lifespan of a man in the county that we're in. Why is that? And it's this combination of growing up in a really toxic environment and the absence of fresh food. Simple. How?
Simple but complicated.
But really? In 2023, in the richest country in the history of the world, that problem still exists. I got to give a TED Talk 5 or 6 years ago, and they wanted me to tell the story of my community, which is not my community. Mm-hmm. Like, I claim it, and they've embraced me, but I'm always a visitor. I'm a foreigner. I don't have that lived experience. So while I'm present and they embrace me, I'm still not one of them, right? So there's this, it's not my story to tell. So I kept telling them no. Yeah. And they kept calling me, we really think this is a powerful story that needs to be told. So I went back to my neighborhood and said, they want me to do this, but it's not my story. And they're like, tell our story. Yeah. Nobody's ever asked before. Represent us. Yeah. Well, when I know what they've experienced and they give me permission to represent them, like I have never prepared for a talk like I prepared for that, because I just wanted to make them proud. But I didn't slow down to think about the purpose of a TED Talk. It's to share ideas that have the power to change the world. Mm-hmm. Well, the guy that spoke before me is a smart cities guy, talking about predictive analytics and how before long we'll have autonomous vehicles that will make over 1 billion calculations a second to be statistically safer on highways than when a human being's behind the wheel. It's an idea that can change the world. Sure. The lady that spoke after me, I had one of my friends that was dying of late-stage renal failure from undiagnosed high blood pressure and had gone in to shut his kidneys down. And so absent a kidney transplant, he wasn't going to be with us very long. So she was from Mayo Clinic talking about the whole antiquated thing of organ transplantation is a thing of the past, because they can take stem cells from your own DNA and make a brand new heart, liver, and kidney and lung. Mm. And I'm up there talking about, and we're in one of the richest cities in the richest country in the history of the world. We import 40% more food into our city than we consume. We waste 40% of all the food we import into our community. And we happen to have 40 communities like Bonton that are classified as a food desert, and we can't figure that out. It's not that complex. If we can make organs out of stem cells and we can have cars drive themselves, I would argue that we haven't implied the same passion and commitment to entrepreneurial spirit of solving problems when it comes to the sake of helping others than we apply to make a dollar.
So then why haven't we?
I think
what have you observed?
I think we have disconnect where we take the things that work for us in our everyday life and how we solve problems for ourselves and for our families and our businesses, and we put on a charitable hat in this philanthropy space that has a different way of thinking. And I don't think we should do that. I think the same grit and commitment and perseverance and innovation that drives us in the business world. When I worked for the private equity firm, if we were a half a point behind quarterly projections, we would fly to New York and meet until we figured out a way to make up that half a point. And if we didn't, there were different people in those seats next quarter.
Right.
When do you ever see a nonprofit fail? When do you ever see innovation that's so groundbreaking that it changes, it shifts paradigms in the way people think about anything? When has that happened last in the space of serving people that are vulnerable?
Right.
I can't think of much.
So you talked earlier about, and I want to keep diving on that because I think that's really powerful and really important, but you also talked earlier about government intervention. Mm-hmm. Does the same apply there?
Well, I think that we're best served when, I'm a small government person, so I don't know if we want to get into politics here, but
I don't want to get into politics. It's not politics, but it's like it's a huge force, like a charitable force in some communities, where it overwhelms the market, if you will, because it's so powerful with here's where incentives are, or here's where money is, or here's what's required, that you have to just realize it or recognize it in some way.
Yeah, I think that in our experience is that we have to start with the idea of what do we think of each other. Because if I hold you in really high regard and you were living off of what the government said you were worth, because somehow somehow you found yourself in a difficult situation, and somebody had to intervene, and the best option for you was what the government offered. Maybe it's a housing voucher, whatever.
Right.
And so now I've got a housing voucher for $750 a month, which in order to get that precludes me from earning more, because if I earn more, I lose. My voucher goes down in direct proportion to what I earn. So now I can't earn money, or I lose the safety net that's my housing voucher. So what do you do? I surrender myself that I'm worth $750 a month, and that somehow I have to create some side hustle that's illegal that nobody knows about, so that I don't get my entitlement benefits cut. And that's how I live. Or I have to take a risk that I'm worth more than that, and I have to put that in jeopardy and trust of free market principles.
It's a huge risk for somebody.
And this is what I can't comprehend. And I tell people all the time, I try to put myself into other people's shoes as best I can, but you can't walk in them if you hadn't actually experienced.
Sure.
I can walk alongside you. But I can't imagine what it's like for somebody that's literally been drowning their whole life to be given a safety net in terms of a housing voucher. So I have a family that was very close to when I first moved to Bonton, that I got close to them because they got evicted. And it was a young single mother and her 2 young children. And while they were out, the one night that they were on the street, she was raped and the children were present. It's a horrible thing. So, we surrounded this family with all the resources and counseling and trauma counseling and all that we could do to try to help them overcome that. Loved on and supported those kids and plugged them in as best we could. And for her, when she got her voucher, which was part of her journey, it's like for the first time in her life she was safe. So if I've been drowning my whole life and now I'm not, it's unlikely that people are going to risk anything to continue to climb and advance. Right. It's almost like a crippling thing.
Right.
And so I think that's where another area where we need each other is to spark that continual conversation about, I understand and I'm empathetic to it, but you're worth so much more.
Right.
And let's keep on the journey. And when we start to show through our work in Bonton that people start to overcome and to build and grow and no longer need entitlements, then all of a sudden that opens the door for us to influence policy. But it only works in my opinion, if it starts at a grassroots and builds and proves something, and then you can impact policy from the top down.
Right.
But if you try to impact policy from the top down before you prove it, it's almost just like paralysis through analysis. You can't ever get to action because you're just analyzing and debating on different perspectives of what could be.
Yeah, you're arguing about
You're
theoretical
stuck.
outcomes
Yeah.
and things of that nature. You never go.
And
you never go forward.
case in point, you know, I don't know if you know this, but when you go to prison, if you go to a state or federal prison, you go to a place, but you got arrested somewhere, specific location. And when you get out of prison, you go back to usually where you're from. And even though you've served time and people have deemed you fit to re-enter society, in 12 years, I've never served a man or woman coming home from incarceration that didn't have legal issues in the place that they arrested before they went to prison.
What sort of legal issues? What do you mean?
In our neighborhood, you get pulled over for anything because if there's anything possible, they'll pull you over to see if you're up to anything else. So a lot of it's failure to signal a turn, front headlight out, failure to come to a complete stop, because they're looking for other things and then get written a ticket that you don't have the money to pay for. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, you go to prison, serve 12 years and come home. That stuff doesn't go away. So I go take one of my friends that's participating in this job thing. He has to apply for 3 jobs to meet the terms, 3 jobs a week to meet the terms of his parole. So his ID and driver's license expired while he was in prison. So I take him to the DMV, and while we're sitting there, you sign into the DMV and then go sit down and wait for him to call your name. And when we were waiting, the constable comes up, taps him on the shoulder, and asked him if he would confirm his name. He told him. He asked him to step over here with him, had him go up against the wall, frisked him, and arrest him. He just came home from prison. He just served 7 years in prison, comes home. He's trying to do everything they subscribed to him to do to get his life on track, and he gets arrested for local fines and warrants that he had before. So all we did is we committed. I can't remove that, but I'll walk alongside you through it. Yeah. We will get through this. Yeah. And I started having people trust me to walk with them through that. And in 12 years, we've never had a single person reoffend. You know, the recidivism rate in the country is over 50% in the first 12 months, and it's over 70% in the first 4 years. In 12 years, we've never had one reoffend.
No kidding.
We have people usually say, wow. And I was like, that's not what we should be saying wow to. We should be saying wow to the fact that we have a system where 70% of the people fail.
Right.
How does that sustain?
With that system. Yeah.
But because we have this track record, we were able to talk to politicians who wanted to do the right thing and just didn't know how. We made it easy for them to say yes. They drafted a bill, and 2 years later was passed into law called the Bonton Farms Act now, where in the state of Texas it's illegal to have people come out of incarceration and still have fines and warrants. Those things are removed for time served.
Wow.
And so I think that's a model of how we can have systematic change at the political and governmental level, but it starts grassroots, where you understand people, understand their circumstances, walk with them to overcome that barrier, show the world when that barrier is removed, look how people flourish, and who doesn't want to see more of that?
Right.
How can we affect policy to make that more possible for more people?
Right. So we're not talking about politics, but you're talking about just the environment that we're dealing with, and government and corrections and all these elements. But I want to focus in on you being in the middle of it, being closest to the people that you believe in and want to invest in with your time and with your talent and with your treasure, that you're finding solutions. It's hard, but you're finding solutions. And when you find a solution, then you can. Then I'm hearing you say you have the opportunity then to change some of those other things.
Yeah, I just think that's the thing, is that we get paralyzed by these problems are so big, and then it locks us down to where we can't have the same kind of innovation and breakthrough that we do every day and in the rest of the parts of our lives. These problems are not that complex, but they lead to catastrophic outcomes that affect a lot of people, so it feels ominous.
Right.
It's not hard to solve a food desert problem, but yet it's a pervasive issue in our country.
Right.
It's not hard to create economy in places that don't have it. We're really entrepreneurial in this country. We can create businesses, but we use the excuse that if I have an option to create a business in North Dallas, where the demographics are better suited and the skilled labor is better suited, and I think it's safer, then I'm going to do that. And in continuing that pattern, we continue to isolate and leave more and more parts of our city and neighborhoods behind, and those people being hopeless and and left behind wind up committing acts that aren't aligned with their character because I'm not going to roll over and play dead for anybody.
Right.
I'm going to find a way to survive in the system that I've been given to navigate through.
Right.
And so we can create businesses there. Healthcare is another big void. We cost our nation billions, trillions of dollars in healthcare, where community-based healthcare could solve that problem. And we're starting to see that solve itself. And you know why? Because there's an economic incentive to do it. It's more expensive for hospitals when my neighbor gets sick, if they twist an ankle or they have a cold, they're calling an ambulance because that's the only way they'll be seen. You know what the cost of that is?
Right.
But if we did
Outrageous.
community-based
It's very
health care, it lowers the cost. People wind up getting treated earlier on, so the symptoms or what they're going through is not so severe. It's less expensive to treat, and it's better off for everybody.
Right.
So because there's an economic engine, healthcare is resolving itself. Banking's not. Building economies not. Food desert issues not.
But they're all solvable.
They're all solvable.
They're all solvable
There may not be the
issues,
same
right?
There might not be the same economic benefit that's as clear as healthcare, but it is absolutely each one of those things are solvable, and that's why I'm so driven, because the answers are there. We just have to scale them.
But
we've done it in Bonton.
And you've been doing that in Bonton. So talk about some of those things where you found some solutions in those areas and how it would impact the financial system, the food system, the economic system overall, of viewing, of thinking differently, of believing and investing in communities that have great people but haven't had the access or the hope of people believing.
So let me give you a real life example when it comes to credit, just when it comes to financial. Socioeconomic is not everything, and I think sometimes we focus on it too much. I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world, and I love culture, and I love authenticity. So I like to go to places that most people don't go when I get to experience a new place. And I wind up in places that aren't usually the shining part of the cities. But they're the most joyful people in places I've been have exponentially less. In fact, one of my friends from Nairobi came to visit us, and when she came to Bonton, in Nairobi, they call their inner city slums. And if you're in Brazil, they call them favelas. So there's different words for these places all over the world, but they represent the same thing. It's where the destitute, the hopeless, and the poor live. But she came to Bonton, and she said, "This is your slum?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, your poverty glitters." It's all relative, right?
Right.
But I've been asking this question for a long time now. Could you be and do what you've been and done if you never had access to credit? And in 8 years or so of asking that question, if you think about it, I've never had a single person say yes. My personal story is when I graduated from college and got a job, I had no value to create yet because I just graduated college. My only accomplishment was I finished my education. So they don't reload. You don't get a reload package when you start. At least you didn't when I left college.
Right.
We also didn't have credit cards before we had credit, like they give to kids now. So they're like, "Yes, we want to hire you, but we want you to move to this location, and this is your start date." Well, to move, I needed to rent a U-Haul. To rent a U-Haul, I had to have credit card. I don't have it. I had to call and get an apartment. I had to pay first and last month's rent and first and last month's deposits from all my utilities because I was a new client, had no record. How do I do all? It cost me $5,000 to start my first job. If I didn't have credit, I couldn't even accepted that opportunity. And so in Bonton, we start with a negative credit. We don't have financial institutions, so all that's there is predatory. So from the jump, I have bad credit. So I'm a risk to start out with. And once you're a risk, then you no longer qualify for credit that's advantageous. You only qualify for credit that's predatory. And so that's how I start. We've just launched the first of its kind inner city bank, that we challenge the banks that support us to say, don't come down here and do what you always do. Tell us you're going to teach us financial literacy.
Right.
First of all, do you know what our community, what banks have traditionally done to our community?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of
And do you
history.
know the perspective that we have for you and your involvement in that? And then to come down and call us illiterate and that you're here to teach us what you know isn't going to start this relationship on the proper footing.
Right.
So they're like, well, we just don't know what to do. Financial education is really important. I said, I agree, but the way we're going about it, and that's all you do, is almost cruel, because now you teach me how to manage money, but I have none of the tools to do it with. But yet the most prevailing the most prevailing intervention in the financial services sector for people that are poor is financial education, financial literacy. Every bank, every FDIC, everybody has it, and everybody does it. But what hasn't been done is the tools that are necessary to apply it.
So you can have it,
It's
you
cruel.
can be taught it, but you have
can't-
no
you can't
tools to actually apply it,
Yeah.
or actually use it.
Yeah.
You can't use that knowledge that you.
Well, if I have an account and can't maintain a certain limit, the fees are so expensive to do. Banks, the average break-even point for a bank to process a loan is $2,500. We've been doing microloans in our neighborhood for 8 years. Our average loan, you want to guess what it is? $47.
$47 now. Yeah.
We have a 93% payback rate. So we just challenge the banks that if you'll come down here and listen and not treat us as charity, if you viewed us as a future customer, if you viewed us as an emerging market,
Right.
what tools would you see that we had so that we could build a bridge to becoming a remedial financial customer to becoming a mainstream financial customer? And their answer is, I don't know. And I said, that's the best place to start, because our community can tell you the tools that they need
Right.
to move up what they call SES, or socioeconomic status. They can tell you the tools they need to build that bridge, and would you be willing to build them with us? And they were. And so we've just launched the first of its kind inner city bank that's a full comprehensive suite of financial tools that are remedial in nature, that meet their current needs, with the belief that they'll use those tools and leverage them to move up their socioeconomic status where they become a future mainstream banking customer. Isn't that better?
That's so. How is that a solution that could work in the 800
you
other?
You can use it, and it's scalable in every neighborhood across the country. These problems, not just that's just one example.
That's just one of them.
These problems only exist because we haven't showed the fortitude to see them through.
Right.
The answers are there. And in my opinion, it's different thinking when we serve vulnerable people. Somehow we think they're not capable, even if we don't admit it. I haven't met people that engage in this space that are malicious in any way.
Right.
I've not met a bad person wanting to give them themselves to help somebody else that's malicious.
Right.
But yet there's a different mentality that we approach to it, and in that mentality, we actually handicap the people that we say we love and care and believe in. And if we quit handicapping people and saying, I believe you can do what I do, let me just equip you and send you on your way. Oh, and if you're behind a little bit, I'll walk with you to show you how to do what I've learned to do along the way. Watch what they do.
Right.
And that's what's happening in our community. Our community, property crime, violent crime, and murder rates have gone down 73% over the last 10 years in a city that set violent crime and murder records the last 3 years in a row.
Wow. Wow.
It's possible.
It's possible. It's not possible. It's not just possible. It's happening.
That's evidence of what people don't want to commit crimes.
Right.
It's an act of hopelessness. It's a cry for help. Like, I just haven't met bad people that want to go hurt other people and rob and steal and pilfer from other people. I've met people that want to live into this ideal that this country espouses, that we're all created equal with certain unalienable rights. And yet when I feel like you don't treat me as that and the world says I'm not worth that, then I start to get angry and bitter. Yeah. And the results of that hopelessness and despair starts to manifest in my actions.
And the solution
not who they are.
The solution is understanding it and walking with people, building relationships, building trust, and being closest to where these issues are being faced, and that all these outside-in solutions really take the value away. Am I hearing that?
Yeah.
Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah. It's unintended. Please don't. I'm not.
A lot of
I'm
good
not
hearts.
criticizing.
Exactly. There's a lot of good hearts, but in the charitable space of, it's the old phrase, I'm coming from the government and I'm here to help you, or I'm from this charitable organization, I'm here to help you. So what you're articulating is that walking with someone, helping someone, is a very different way of thinking than what we've been doing in the past.
Yeah.
These are solvable problems. These are solvable issues if we believe in people and look at it differently.
No question. And I think the really important thing is that once we agree to that mentality, that framework, then the thing is we can't rest until we have a solution that removes those barriers.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reasons why I joined the Stand Together team is because when I did 8 years ago, the guy that came down and told me about it, I'd never heard of it before, didn't know anything about it, but he played me this video of Charles Koch, and he said what I was experiencing in Bonton, he articulated almost perfectly. He said, we believe that free people are capable of extraordinary things.
Right.
Well, I would have said it a little differently because I didn't experience so much a lack of freedom, but equipped people are capable of extraordinary things. And I think we have 45 million Americans living in 825 communities that we designed during the time of segregation for people to be separated from the tools and resources and opportunities that we had at our disposal. And that what I think happened, and this is just my personal theory, is that when civil rights occurred, people like me all of a sudden thought we'd made the progress we needed to make, and we diverted our attention to other things. And yet these places continue to produce broken, toxic, small people that are capable of extraordinary things, but we cut them off from the tools and resources they needed to do it, and we haven't gone back to build that bridge. And that if we did so, we would finally connect the dots between civil rights, connecting us back to that first sentence of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, and the actual outcomes of the people that are born into those environments. And we would finally be able to live into the ideals that we espouse as a country. And what an amazing day that will be.
Yeah, yeah. And that day's happening in Bonton.
It's happening.
It's happening. It's
happening,
progress. It's not complete yet, but you're 10 years into this. You're well into it. And maybe as we kind of wrap this discussion, it's just been fascinating, and how you were prepared and equipped to do the work that you're doing through the challenges of your life, but the parallels and how you then are prepared to understand and think differently about others because you believe in them the way others believed in you. So as we kind of, I don't know if you have any kind of closing thoughts of what should I be thinking about after this discussion? What should I be thinking about that gives me hope, that gives me recognition, but that challenges me to think differently or to be open to other possibilities or opportunities in this area about living up? We celebrate our freedoms in this country. We celebrate the successes of this country, but we know that it hasn't happened for everybody. There's talk about 45 million people who aren't experiencing that. How should we think about that differently?
Yeah, I think that we need to really challenge our mindset around philanthropy and how we serve the most vulnerable, and be willing to have what we call creative destruction in a way that we aspire for so much more than we've been able to accomplish so much that we're willing to let go of our egos and what we think we know and challenge those presuppositions with new ideas. And that we have models that work. We're not reinventing the wheel. If I were to go to a real estate website, if you said, gosh, I'm tired of Dallas and the 110-degree weather, this 70-degree day in Grand Rapids feels good, I want to move here. So I'm like, Doug, what's a great neighborhood that I might, my family and I might move to? You would tell me the name of it, and I would go put it into any real estate website. And what's it going to tell me? What's the crime rate? What are the quality of the schools? Where's the nearest bank? Where's the nearest grocery store? Where's the nearest healthcare center? Because that's the foundations of a healthy community. And if you were to do that in any one of the 825 neighborhoods in the United States, they wouldn't have any good marks on any of those 5 things. So if we just took those 5 things and said, how do we address that? Because if that's what we know are the foundational, the macro components of a healthy community, why couldn't we find solutions to see that those macro components of a healthy community were manifest in our 825 communities that don't have any of those things?
Right.
And then not rest until we apply the same entrepreneurial tenacity that it takes to birth a business to solving that problem. And if you replace the importance that we have on dollars with the human lives that we're able to, like for me, I live with the people that are suffering apart from that solution. So like when I can't feed my family or pay my rent, I'm compelled to earn more money so that I can. When you walk alongside, when you're in proximity to the people that are closest to the problem and suffering, the passion that you have, just like you would have of earning more money to see that you don't get evicted, the passion you have of solving the problem for those people would exist, and we would not accept no for an answer. And we wouldn't allow Band-Aid interventions to be the status quo and be okay. We would find solutions that are transformative, that no longer need those interventions because the problem's solved.
Yeah. But you're saying, and again, maybe if you just wrap, it's not a money issue. It's a belief. It's a thinking. It's an entrepreneurial issue. It's an investment issue. It involves money. It involves economic sort of aspects, but you're never going to solve anything. It involves people. It involves their thinking, and it's the way they think and believe in others, and the way they prepare people to be successful.
And I think that you wouldn't endeavor to start a business that was destitute to, or that was determined to lose money every year.
Right.
So we shouldn't approach these solutions in a way that requires ongoing financial support. If the solutions we come up with require financial life support, we haven't really found a solution. In Bonton, we have a principle we call leverage philanthropy, which means that we're behind the 8 ball. We need help. We need philanthropic investment. But I'm going to leverage that philanthropic investment so that I don't need philanthropic investment going forward. It's part of our bylaws of the organization at Bonton Farms that we cannot create a cost center. I have to present my board with a solution that I have 3 to 5 years to break even or make a profit, or else I have to go back and refine my idea until it can.
Right.
And we've so far, all of these solutions we've done are take philanthropic investment to get started, but don't require philanthropic investment to sustain them. And so that money, as we prove that we can solve problems, the people that invest in us, their return on investment is, you solved a problem that I don't need to keep investing in. I want to give you more money to go solve another problem. It's not a resource. There's always capital out there for innovative things that change the game for the better. The only thing I've not been able to figure out how to monetize is, we haven't graduated over 54% of our kids from high school in 40 years. And the only reason I know 40 years is because that's how far the data goes back. So that's not okay. That's a system that's not working for us. So we started a private Christian school that did 2 things. Provided the best equipment and resources the kids needed, provided a world-class curriculum and education, and the teachers that are funded and paid to deliver that, and then a context and environment that understands these kids have already suffered and experienced more than most people do in their lifetime, and that they need to have some understanding and passion and mental and emotional support to be able to apply those things that we're teaching them. And I don't know how to monetize that. It costs $12,000 a kid to do that right every year. And that's the only thing where we broke our bylaws and made an exception. Because if we're going to change generations, we've got to intervene with children and provide them the framework for success so they don't keep repeating
maybe it's just
the problems of the past.
As you say that, you talked about philanthropic investment. Maybe it's just longer term investment.
Yeah.
It's just a longer term horizon, and maybe the only issue is that when you invest in children, it's probably not a 3 to 5 year return.
No,
it's probably going to be a 10 to 20 or 30 year return.
Yeah.
But there's lots of models that demonstrate that return on investment in people.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Daron, this is just a fascinating conversation, and I love how you have brought all the different your personal life, your observations, and your entrepreneurial mindset to demonstrate your belief in people, and that it's working. So that gives me hope.
Yeah.
As we try to do things, or as you look at other communities, as we said, we're going to try to do things differently. And it's not a heart problem. We have a lot of caring people in this community. It's not a money problem. There's a lot of resources in this community. It's just a determination problem, and it's a if I'm hearing this right, it's a determination problem, and it's a thinking, it's a perspective.
Yeah.
And when you genuinely believe and you genuinely want to solve that problem or bring a solution so that people have the resources and tools that they need, we can have a completely different outcome.
Do we have time for me to say one thing that I think is important
bring us home.
In closing? Is that I think that the one thing, because I hope that whoever has a chance to hear this, and if it's just for us, then so it'll be worth it. But But I think there's another fatal flaw in our system, that if we motivate people to go out and change the way they view things, so that we can see real transformation start to happen. There's one other really important caveat to this, is that as a farmer, if I were to take a seed and put it in one of the windows in this building and put it in a ball of cotton that I could keep moist, and in that window it got plenty of daylight. Let's say I put a carrot there. Would I ever be able to come back and get fruit from that seed? It's in a window, and it has sunlight, and I keep it moist. Would that carrot seed ever grow into a plant that produced fruit?
I don't know.
No. Why? It has two of the three things that are the macro nutrients that it needs to flourish, but one thing's missing. And because that one thing's missing, it renders the sunlight and the water irrelevant. And we do this in the social services sector with vulnerable people all the time, is we think that we treat them as if they're one-issue human beings. We just need to help them get a job. We just need to help them get housing. We just need to help them get on their feet. We just need to counsel them, whatever those different issue-related interventions are. But people are like a seed. We're an ecosystem of things. And if any one of those components of the ecosystem is malaligned or out of place, it renders the other great things we do useless. And so we did all these years of creating opportunities for people to get to work and have jobs, but absent credit, when I would come out and go to work and my battery was dead and I don't have $100, but I just earned a car through the program we offered and I have a title, I go put my car title up at the car title loan place, 311% interest. So I've been given a shovel to dig my own grave. I can't get out of that hole, wind up losing my car, can't get to work, miss a day's work, get fired from my job and start right back over. Because we didn't treat that human being as an ecosystem, as a seed that needed multiple things to see that it thrived. And that would be the thing I would say in closing, is that yes, we can solve these problems. And yes, we can we can use the giftings that we have and shift our thinking to really transform society. But we can't treat people as if there's certain issues. They have to understand the ecosystem that human beings need to flourish and provide that whole system of support.
Right.
And then we can change the world.
Then we can. Well, let's go change the world.
Yeah. I mean,
thank you, Darren, for what you're doing to change Bonton and showing an example of how the world can change. Thanks for your time.
having me. Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
it. Thank you, sir.
Yep.